the part that's really interesting to me is this idea of editing down to a small unit. So if you think about writing and poetry, the sort of condensation of a bigger idea into a small phrase, and then when you think about visual images, the way to sort of make the simplest image tell the biggest story, so that it's just kind of open for reading. So it's a metaphor that's personal but yet totally open to the viewer or open to the reader, and that has sort of complex, nuanced layers, and that different people can interpret in different ways. So even though it's coming out as a painting, the whole process of, or the way that I'm sort of thinking about it is still kind of as a writer. I'm thinking about what you read first. I have the text from the typewriter, I edit it down to the phrases that I want to use, and then I start to lay it out, little tiny text on this 12-foot piece of paper, thinking carefully about where each one's going to go, where you naturally, inherently sort of read, or where I think a viewer, where your body reads from, sort of going through, and then building up imagery little by little around it so that you're even more pulled into it, so that it kind of reads like a long scroll. Okay, we're going to make a little jump back. So this is a rug that my great-grandmother made. I love to include this slide because I think it's, it's one of those things that you don't kind of think about until later in your life. But this rug was hanging up in my house, our apartment in Queens when I was growing up, and sort of went with us wherever we went. So the story of my family is like complicated. They had to move from one continent to the other. My great-grandmother was, survived the Armenian genocide. She left with her daughter. She went to Egypt. She had kids in Egypt. The kids in Egypt got married. My mother got married, and she had, we just kept moving around and around and around. I was the first one born here. But then later on looking at it, started to think what was really interesting to me about this rug was that she made this while she was in Egypt, because she put the Sphinx and the pyramids there and a little camel, a very cute camel. But at the same time, the text here is all about her longing for where she was born. And so it's this kind of, your body's in one place, but your mind is in another place, or your body's in one place and your heart is in a different place. And that really resonated with me. And, just kind of like, it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, that's kind of what I think I've been working with, that kind of continuous theme of a physical experience of a place and then a sort of psychological experience of a place. I don't work from pictures directly. I'll take pictures like this, but think of them almost as like a bank of deposits to pull from later. It's kind of a way of note-taking in a sense. And so as the paintings get formed, sometimes there's more literal representations of poles being placed, markers being put in, territory being claimed. And although a lot of the writing starts out as sort of me alone in my studio working on it, a lot of it takes text from the world around us. So news stories, weather reports, menu items, street names, all that kind of stuff filters into the text. Something that I deal with a lot is, am I just making decorations for rich people? Painting is commodity based. It's not necessarily democratic. I have an issue with that. And yet that's the thing that I'm doing, so I can't sort of begrudge that. But what I started to do in response to that in some way, and it did shift my practice a little bit, was to think about different ways of displaying work. Like just altering the pristine, sort of sterile quality of a white cube and thinking about showing things without frames, thinking about tacking paper into a wall, thinking about creating a different kind of environment. If you think about the way we carry ourselves, I teach, and when I take my kids to the museum or the gallery, everybody walks in like church mice. Like everyone's intimidated by the institution of art. Everyone's voice gets really quiet. Not that you should run around like crazy people inside a gallery, but it's another human being on the other end of that painting, and there's a way that you can respond to it. So I thought that maybe by changing the way things are exhibited, that could actually change the way we think about work, and creating this kind of more immersive environment so that you could like go in close and pull back. And it's kind of what's happening out there too, so that you can interact with the space in a physically different kind of way, which might make you experience the space in a mentally different kind of way. And sometimes there are projects where the community actually makes the work itself. This is again Asbury Park. These projects seem to work best in communities that are open to change or sort of undergoing some kind of transition. So this project was based on a ritual of tree veneration, which is this ancient custom that's practiced all around the world where you tie a ribbon around a tree and you sort of make a wish. And so the idea here was for people to come out and make wishes for their city in Asbury Park, and it was this amazing response where the whole entire fence of this, there wasn't a tree, there was just sort of this empty lot. And it was covered with ribbons and sort of stayed there until they all disintegrated. And that project was recreated in a neighborhood in Belgium and then in New York as well. That one says really real. So we actually played a game of tug of war, and this was the whole project. Everybody got in a team, we had tug of war. What started happening though in this project was that this poem was kind of self-generating. It was using that kind of NCAA brackets. So as things sort of went forward and won, it was kind of making this funny poem where absurd categories were facing off against each other. So work, sleep, sleep won, puppies, kittens, kittens won. All of a sudden it was sleep versus kittens. Which, what does that even mean? It doesn't mean, it's kind of insane. And then logic and sleep. Logic actually ended up winning the whole thing, which is appropriate kind of for a college campus. So it was this great experiment in like getting deeply attached to something that's nothing, which is just this idea of puppies versus kittens. different other views. And what you start to see here are all these like hard shapes, color block shapes that are representative of a landscape. This is one of the things that he said about writing the poem. When I searched around for what would be the center of that thing, and in a way I was kind of mimicking that same step. And when I would get back to the studio, I would do things like this. Put together little pieces of paper, just trying to figure out, I don't know, landscape in some way. But really, I think what was happening here was it was more about thinking of these as poems, thinking of them as lines, images, again, modifiers, breaks, pauses, and little sort of stanzas that make up this larger epic whole. And when I thought about that kind of layering, well, here's some more pictures of this sort of, you'll see those in the catalog. So the result here was to make a book. I had this opportunity, this giant space in that atrium to make anything I wanted, and I wanted to make this tiny little book, just a tiny poem. And so it was kind of a conflict in a way about what am I going to do with that big space. But it all started with this poem, and I wanted William Carlos Williams to be in the poem. And so in the catalog, you'll see the places that are in light gray are his text. Those are his words being quoted, sort of layered in with my text there, referencing the way he did that same structure in his own poem. So when it came time to the installation and I was kind of trying to figure out what to do, I again went back to Williams and his process and thought about taking this kind of intimate personal thing and making it epic and grand. And so I played with the idea of scale. So you see that the little studies of the, I don't know what to call those little things. I call them paintings, I call them studies, I call them collages. Those little visual paintings in a way get put up in a much grander scale here, but not just painted, so that there is this continuous layer thing going on. There's tacked on paper, some things are painted directly on the wall, and the whole idea of it is that as you move through that space, something reveals itself and something hides itself, and as you circle around, each step is constantly changed by what you saw before and what you're going to see after, which is kind of like the way a poem works. I just wanted to end with this quote here because this is how he starts the poem. He has this in the beginning of Paterson. He says, to make a start out of particulars and then make them general and rolling. Rolling up the sum by defective means, sniffing the trees, just another dog among a lot of dogs. What else is there? So it kind of summarizes in some way, I think, the whole experience of doing that project, about taking something that's very personal and specific and then sort of making it more general by defective means, having that doubt, and then thinking, what else is there? That's the end of the talk. Okay. I can take questions.
Questions. And you get your little handout on the way out.
Yeah, yes.
Start down.
You start from an early age, or did the want to make paintings come out of your writing skill, or is it just something you always like?
I always drew as a kid. I always drew as a kid, but I come from a first-generation immigrant family. My mother worked at 2 jobs, and at night she worked at a laundromat. There was no way her daughter was going to become an artist, i.e. broke, right? So, there was no one ever said to me oh, you should be an artist, go pursue that, dream. But they were always encouraging, but always wanted me to, they just wanted to make sure I didn't have a hard life. So I just did it because I love to do it. Still now, I think if you chopped off a couple of my fingers, I'd still probably draw with just the one finger. You know what I mean? I just like doing it. So whatever I was going to do as a career, I was still going to do the art. I just got lucky in the sense that it became my career. But I started doing it as a kid. I don't know when I started thinking about it as a profession. I've always done it, and then it just sort of happened little by little. Mm-hmm. The question was when did I start making work? Or when did I, right? Something like that.
In a way, one came first already.
Yeah. Yes.
Go back to the last wall, please.
Sure. Why? I'm so curious. Okay. It's in your book, too. Yes.
What art school did you go to? Did you not go to art school?
I went for English degree. I went to Barnard College.
Oh, right, you're a poet too, right?
And then I got my MFA in writing. Although the thing I did at Columbia when I was studying there, I did half my credits in visual art. And now you can go to school and sort of do interdisciplinary where you cross different mediums. At the time, that was not popular. But I had a teacher there who understood that. Like, he understood poetry. His name was Archie Rand. He's still alive and working today. He understood poetry and he understood imagery and he understood the kind of desire to do both. So he got me a studio at Columbia. Like, I was in with the regular art kids, and he really made that happen.
Like in art school, it doesn't look like something that you would, because I'm imagining that art school would be like, they make you do things that are like so conventional, you know? I don't think you would like this. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, no, there was a little bit of pushback. I mean, the great thing about that school was that it was kind of small, shockingly. Like, there was only 18 kids in my program, and so we were all in the same buildings anyway, and so you kind of everyone kind of hung around with each other, and so in some way it was more fluid than in real life than it was on paper. On paper, you had to be either a writer, or you had to be an artist, or you had to be a filmmaker. They were all separate from each other. But in the real life of the program, we were all kind of mixed together. Yeah. Yes. No. No, that's a great question, though. No, I really like it. I feel like I do the same process in terms of writing, but the form is different. So, no. Thank you, though.
Yes, I recall earlier on where you mentioned that sometimes you go around talking to people and use their words as inspiration for your art.
Yeah.
Are there any in particular that really allow you to get very creative, or like that you really enjoy?
Well, I mean, sometimes I think, it was more like sometimes they get quoted verbatim. I mean, that's how good people's responses are when they're sort of isolated out, and they get sort of remixed as a new poem. I can't think of anyone in particular that I think, oh, that one like totally blew it out of the water, but sort of in combination together, they made those projects really meaningful. And it's so great to talk to people. Like, people start to tell you their story about something, and, you have to be like a hard-hearted person to not get moved. Sometimes it's very surface. Sometimes it's just about something really basic. But then every once in a while, there's a story that's really deep and moving, And I'm not at all like a psychologist or anthropologist or anything like that. I mean, I'm just purely coming at it from the art point of view. But I am coming at it from the point of view of another human being. So I'm interested,
I have a question.
Yes.
The picture of your grandmother's rug.
Yeah.
You talked about the top piece, but not about the bottom script.
The text.
The text. Could you say a little bit about
Sure.
what that means?
The text says, long life to you, Mother Armenia, because that's where she's Armenian ethnically. So it's this kind of aspirational, nationalistic kind of text about longing for homeland, in a place that she left as a young woman and would never ever see again. So it was this kind of, missing of your place of birth or your culture in some way. Anything else? Yes. Yeah. Yes, I don't know. Yes, I'll be happy to. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, I hope you've all gotten to, you've seen the installation in the other room? Yeah. How can you not? It's just sort of blinding. It's really, but enjoy it and go inside. It's meant to be walked around in. Thank you.